want to update you tonight on yesterday's shooting attack in Paris, the one that killed one police officer and wounded several more. French police have finally released some basic information about the shooter who was killed during that attack. Karim Chafouri was his name. He was 39. He was born in France. He'd already spent 14 years in various French prisons for offenses, including prior attacks on the police. So the police have not officially decided, or at least announced, what his motive might have been. President Trump, meanwhile, tweeted about the attack this morning. He said this, quote, saying another terrorist attack in Paris, the people of France will not take much more of this, will have a big effect on the presidential election. Was the president right? Could recurring Islamic violence sweep Marine Le Pen to power? Marie Harf was a spokeswoman for the State Department under the president, the former one, Obama, and she joins us now. Marie, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
So do you think there's a connection between Marine Le Pen's position in the polls and the Islamic terror attacks that country has faced recently?
Well, the polls are sort of all over the place right now. It definitely is too close to call, and I think there will be a runoff. I don't think anyone will get over 50% on Sunday. I do think that security and terrorism is a key topic, not just in this last attack, which has made the last 24 hours basically what they've been talking about on the campaign trail, but all of the attacks we've seen in France over the last months and years. Security is a big issue there. This last attack, I think, has really made that the focus at the end of this campaign.
I mean, security is a pretty broad term. So you have, let's see, Bataclan, Charlie Hebdo, Kosher Deli, the Nice truck attack, the cops shot this Thursday, yesterday. The one thread that connects them all, apparently, is not just terrorism, but Islamic terrorism, and in a lot of cases, homegrown.
Right.
Don't you think that ordinary French people might say, wow, that's a problem?
Yes, I do. And
yes.
I think they are having a conversation about how to confront that. It's interesting that this attacker was born in France, was not an immigrant, was not a refugee, because so much of what Marine Le Pen has focused on is immigration, is the refugee crisis. The French have a lot of thinking and talking to do about how to confront homegrown radicalism. People who never travel overseas, who pick this ideology up on the internet, who may be on the radar of security services, but who they don't really know what to do with. It is a really hard problem.
France imported, but they're not connected. I mean, France imported a massive Muslim population from their withdrawal from Algeria to present. 50 years they've been doing this. They've got one of the biggest, I think the single biggest Muslim population in Europe. And they also have one of the biggest, maybe the biggest Muslim terror problems. I mean, aren't those two related?
I think they're partially related, yes. And I think that's a huge problem. The French, along with the Germans and others, are dealing with the largest refugee crisis since World War II. That is one security problem with how you deal with an influx of refugees, some of whom may harbor bad intentions. But the French also have to think very hard about how to confront homegrown radicalism. That's a really tough problem. I don't know if French voters will look at what Marine Le Pen is trying to sell to them and go for her.
Well, I don't know. I mean, they contrast it perhaps with what the EU's been trying to sell them for the past 30 years, or Western leaders around the world who are like, shh, there's no Islamic problem. It has nothing to do with religion. They're lying, and maybe the people in France are like, you know what, Marine Le Pen is flawed, but you're liars, and you created the situation that's wrecking our countries. Do you think it's a fair conclusion?
I don't think that's a totally fair conclusion.
You don't?
I know it's surprising that I don't think that's a totally fair conclusion. I think French voters are facing a really unique election for them. One of the top candidates has never held elected office. That doesn't happen in France. Marine Le Pen is a very far-right party that had long been shunned in France, that has newfound popularity today.
Right. Now, I hear that a lot, and I hear that even from reporters who I think are pretty down the middle, repeating this far-right line. I don't understand what that means. Why is Marine Le Pen far-right? She's pretty liberal in economics. She's very liberal on social issues. How is she far-right?
I think, at least when I'm using that term, I won't speak for everyone.
Everybody uses that term. I think the Associated Press uses the term. What does it mean? I don't know what that means.
So to me it means her policies on immigration, her policies on secularism in France, which has long been sort of a French tradition.
Since the Revolution.
Her policies on, today, I think last night she said, let's close all the Islamist mosques. That's a pretty far-right position to take, even in the wake of a terrorist attack.
So it's far-right if you're for restricting immigration? Wouldn't that just be right? No,
well,
I'm not far-right. I'm just kind of right. I'm for restricting immigration, and I don't think you ought to let hotbeds of nutcakes continue to exist unmolested.
She takes all of these issues to the farthest possible.
She does name something that's really far
on immigration. I mean, she has at times called for a complete shutdown of immigration. She has at times.
I'm for that.
She has at times.
Wait, hold on.
Including legal immigration?
Absolutely. I mean, absolutely. I think we need a cooling off period. I like immigrants. I'm not anti-immigrant, but I think immigration at the rate we're doing it hurts the working class. It has real effects on the environment. A lot of reasons. I'm not far right. Maybe I am.
So combine that with Marine Le Pen's flirting with getting out of the EU, flirting with getting out of NATO. Those are positions, I think this election, Tucker, is not an overstatement to say that it could have an impact on the future of Europe.
But doesn't
and
it also...
And I think that is a very interesting,
well, I think you're right.
Interesting question that the French people are looking at. Obviously, in the UK, we saw that with Brexit. It is not an overstatement to say that is what could come from this election.
Yeah, well, maybe that's what voters want. And in a democracy, they get to decide. And maybe they decide that those institutions haven't served their interests very well. And isn't that a legitimate conclusion?
I think it's a legitimate conclusion to say the EU hasn't been perfect. But I worry that some voters in Europe or elsewhere look at an institution like the EU or NATO that, in the wake of these two awful world wars, helped keep Europe free and at peace.
Yeah.
They have served a lot of good. Maybe they're not perfect, but throwing the baby out with the bathwater, to me, seems
70
like
years
a bad
ago,
idea.
They are awesome. Let me just back to the far right thing really quickly. You know what's going on here. The far right, you're not the only one who uses it, it's universal, is a way of dismissing her views as unacceptable, as implicitly comparing them to the Nazis, as saying they're not even worth discussing because they're crazy. Wouldn't it be better to just engage those views and say, here's what the immigration level should be, here's why you're wrong, rather than name-calling and dismissing?
Well, I didn't use some of those names that you used.
No, I'm not saying you are.
I do think that, politically speaking, she is very far right of center.
She's not according to me, not according to American national opinion. Her views are actually kind of left of center on most things.
According to most of the French political analysts that I've heard from,
because they're all internationalists. And what they're trying to say is Marine Le Pen is a wacko. And if you support Marine Le Pen, you're a wacko too. And that's one of the reasons people are staging a revolt against them, because they refuse to engage with the ideas beneath the slogans, don't you think?
I think what is interesting, Tucker, is that we have a race that's happening on Sunday. I think we'll know by about 2 p.m. on Sunday if there's a runoff for who wins or who loses, where we really have no idea what's going to happen. The polling is all over the place. Marine Le Pen is polling very well. Yeah. And that, I think, because of her policies, not because of the names we call her,
right.
Because of her policies, a lot of people who are worried about immigration or the transatlantic alliance are very worried about how she might do.
And some are thrilled. I put myself in that category. Thank you so much, Marie. It's great to see you tonight.
You too.